So, uh, have you ever had a day at work that was just, so incredibly frustrating or toxic or just bizarre that you actually wondered, wait, is my boss's behavior actually illegal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's a super common feeling when things get heated.
Right. Well, in 2025, there was an Australian worker who got fired for, getting into a massive shouting match about geopolitics.
Yeah, that was a messy one.
And around that same time, another worker was fired and actually had her passport confiscated, like locked away by her boss.
Which is just wild.
Totally wild. And the crazy part is, one of these dismissals was perfectly legal and upheld by the authorities. But the other one resulted in a massive federal investigation and thousands of dollars in penalties.
Yeah, it's a harsh reality for a lot of people to accept, honestly.
Right, because today we're looking at why the law fundamentally does not care how you feel about your workplace and how understanding that distinction is, honestly, your only real protection.
Because when you're standing in the middle of a workplace conflict, the line between a boss who's just, managing their business and an employer who's actively breaking the law, it's incredibly blurry.
Exactly.
Like, you're operating on adrenaline, but the legal system operates on cold, hard procedure.
Which is exactly why we are pulling out a massive stack of case files, articles, and service guidelines from AWDR today.
Right, the Australian Workplace Discrimination Representatives.
Yes, AWDR. They are a firm of non-lawyer workplace relations specialists, and they've spent the last 30 years representing workers all across Australia.
Doing mediations, negotiations, tribunals, all of it.
Right, and they've handled cases for over 16,000 clients, which is just a staggering number.
It really is. I mean, that volume of clients tells you a lot about the structural friction in the modern workforce.
Yeah, it means a lot of people are having really bad days at work.
Seriously. And they operate a 247 helpline, which is answered by actual human beings based in Australia. Because, workplace emergencies, the moment you realize you're being pushed out or a toxic situation boils over, they rarely happen on a neat 9 to 5 schedule.
Yeah, they happen at like 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday.
Exactly.
So just to set our baseline right at the top for you listening, we are not here to give you legal advice.
Definitely not.
We're just here to unpack the fascinating, complex, and sometimes totally bizarre real-world outcomes of Fair Work Commission disputes.
The FWC, yeah. We want to look under the hood of these legal rulings so you can understand your own rights a bit better.
Right. And looking at the scope of what AWDR handles, it really forces you to confront the sheer variety of ways a professional relationship can just, implode.
Oh, completely. They deal with straightforward unfair dismissals and sexual harassment, sure, but they also untangle highly complex technical disputes.
Right, the confusing stuff.
Yeah, things like non-genuine redundancies, adverse action claims, allegation of serious misconduct.
Okay, let's unpack this because a lot of those terms get thrown around in corporate break rooms without anyone actually knowing what they mean.
Oh, 100%. People just use them as buzzwords.
Yeah, it's like navigating the Fair Work Act is like playing this high-stakes, incredibly complex board game. But most employees don't actually know the rules until they're already losing.
That's a great way to put it.
Like, people assume any firing they don't agree with is an unfair dismissal, but a non-genuine redundancy is a very specific legal mechanism, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it's a classic example of an employer trying to use a legal loophole and failing.
Oh, right.
Because a genuine redundancy means the business simply doesn't need your specific role to be performed by anyone anymore.
Your job is just gone.
Exactly. But a non-genuine redundancy is when a company claims your job is gone just to get you out the door without triggering unfair dismissal laws, but then they quietly hire someone else to do the exact same tasks a week later.
Which is just so shady.
It is. Or it's when they fail to consult with you about redeployment options within the company when they were legally obligated to do so.
So it's about the procedural reality, not the label the company just slaps on it.
Exactly.
And speaking of the reality of these disputes, I was going through the actual case headlines from the AWDR files, and the spectrum of human behavior is just staggering.
Oh, the files are wild.
Right. Like, you have heavy systemic issues like the HR manager from hell.
Which was a massive case.
Yeah, that was a real case involving $37 million in corporate fraud. But then, and I'm quoting directly from the tribunal files here, you have cases where workers were dismissed over dog poo, BO, and farting.
Yep. The realities of managing people in enclosed spaces, the tribunal literally has to hear it all.
My personal favorite was a supermarket worker who lost their dismissal claim after being told to hide bum crack.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. It sounds absurd, like a comedy sketch. But for the people involved, these are livelihood-ending moments.
Absolutely.
It's their income, their professional reputation, their ability to pay rent, all hanging in the balance over a dress code dispute.
Which brings us to the core challenge, really, because underneath the sensational headlines or the deeply personal embarrassment of something like a dress code violation, there is an inflexible statutory framework.
Right. And, going back to my game analogy, the easiest way to visualize this framework is to think about it like a boxing match.
Okay, I like this.
So the Fair Work Commission is the referee. When an employee feels wronged, they're essentially complaining that the other fighter doesn't like them, or that the other fighter is being mean.
Right.
But the referee doesn't care if the fighters hate each other. The referee only cares if someone hit below the belt.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that boxing referee analogy illustrates exactly why employees often lose their cases if they try to represent themselves.
Because they're focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah. Employees almost exclusively operate on raw feelings of unfairness. If your manager speaks to you sharply, it feels unjust. But feeling wronged and being legally wronged under the Fair Work Act, those are two completely distinct universes.
Because the law doesn't legislate politeness?
Precisely. The law regulates procedure.
Wow, okay.
So the challenge for workplace relations specialists is translating an employee's emotional grievance into an actionable legal breach. They have to find the punch below the belt.
They have to find the actual rule that got broken.
Exactly. Did the employer breach a modern award? Did they fail to provide procedural fairness?
Right. Well, today we're going to look at two contrasting cases from the AWDR files that show exactly how the Fair Work Commission evaluates the difference between a procedural violation and just, a bruised ego.
Let's do it.
Let's start with a scenario where the employer didn't just hit below the belt. They brought a steel chair into the ring and locked the door.
Oh, the Panda Mart case.
Yes, the Panda Mart case. So to understand the rules of the game, we have to look at a case where the employer completely threw the board out the window. This centers on a worker named Yi-Ting Yang.
Right.
She worked at a Panda Mart retail store in Melbourne, starting in February 2025. She was putting in 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, and she was paid entirely in physical cash.
Which, honestly, should instantly trigger alarm bells for anyone familiar with Australian workplace standards.
Right, because of the paper trail.
Yeah. She was paid a flat rate starting at $24 an hour, eventually moving to $26. No pay slips were ever issued.
Not at all.
And she received none of the casual loadings, no weekend penalty rates, none of the basic entitlements guaranteed to her under the national employment standards.
She is just grinding away, accepting the conditions.
Yep.
And fast forward to December 27, 2025, so just 2 days after Christmas. She shows up for her rostered shift. Her colleagues casually mention that she has already been fired.
Imagine finding out from your coworkers.
I know. Then, two starting managers physically pull her out of the store, take her into the car park, and demand she hand over her uniform right then and there.
In the car park.
In the car park. And they tell her never to come back.
Just consider the procedural vacuum here. No prior warnings about her performance.
Right.
No formal meeting. No opportunity to have a support person present, which is like a key pillar of procedural fairness.
She actually handles this incredibly well, though, all things considered. Like, she doesn't scream and shout in the car park.
Which is impressive.
Right. She goes home and emails a higher-level manager, Jessica Yao. She asks for written confirmation of her termination, and she also puts in writing serious concerns about workplace bullying and the psychological safety of the staff, noting they felt unsafe returning to work.
And a written record is always your strongest asset. Always.
But the company's response was to completely ghost her.
Typical.
They ignored the email entirely. So the following day, she files an unfair dismissal claim with the Fair Work Commission.
And this is where it gets really dark.
Yeah. Here is the detail that absolutely stopped me in my tracks when I was reading the tribunal file. During the proceedings, it was revealed that Panda Mart kept Ms. Yang's passport and her visa records.
Yeah.
I have to push back on the mechanics of this.
Okay.
Wait, is it ever legal for an employer to keep someone's passport? How does a retail store even get away with that?
They don't.
It sounds like a bad movie villain holding a hostage. What possible legal justification could a business use to confiscate a federal travel document?
There is zero legal justification. None. And it is a massive escalation from a standard unfair dismissal into severe workplace exploitation.
Just flat-out exploitation.
Absolutely. To clarify the mechanics based on the AWDR guidelines,
Right.
an employer is required by law to verify your right to work in Australia.
Right, so they have to check.
Yeah, they're allowed to ask for your passport and they're allowed to make a photocopy of it for their HR file.
Which is standard onboarding, right?
Yes, very standard. But confiscating and keeping the original document crosses the line into coercion. The Fair Work Ombudsman views retaining a worker's passport as a hallmark of modern slavery and extreme vulnerability.
Wow. Modern slavery.
Yes, it is a control tactic. It's designed to ensure the employee is too terrified of their immigration status being weaponized to ever report wage theft.
Which perfectly explains why they were putting her in cash.
Exactly.
And I want to drill down on the cash aspect, actually, because cash-in-hand hospitality jobs are something of an open secret.
Oh, very much so.
Right. So is the physical act of handing an employee an envelope of cash actually illegal?
Okay, so this is one of the most common misunderstandings in employment law. The physical currency is not the issue. Paying wages in cash is perfectly legal in Australia.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah. You can pay your staff in gold coins if you really want to, provided you meet every single statutory obligation attached to that payment.
The paper trail.
Exactly, the paper trail. You must provide a formal payslip within 1 working day of handing over that cash. That payslip must detail the tax withheld, the superannuation contributions made to the employee's fund, and prove that the hourly rate meets the legal minimums of the relevant award.
And Panda Mart did none of that.
None of it. Panda Mart used cash not as a convenient payment method, but as an invisibility cloak to dodge tax, dodge super, and avoid creating a documentary record of their underpayments.
So AWDR steps in, Ms. Yang files her claim, and they go to the Fair Work Commission. How on earth does an employer defend keeping a passport and firing someone in a car park?
Well, they attempt to deflect. Panda Mart barely engaged with the legal process at all.
Of course they didn't.
They sent a single email to the commission from their manager, Jessica Yao. And instead of addressing the lack of process regarding the dismissal, Yao claimed the company didn't even recognize Ms. Yang.
Wait, they claim she didn't even work there.
Yes. And then in the very same email, Yao suggested that if it was her, she might be one of 2 other workers who the company suspected were breaching their visa conditions by working too many hours.
Oh, wow.
It was a blatant attempt to muddy the waters by accusing the employee of federal immigration breaches, effectively trying to scare her into dropping the claim.
It's the ultimate bad faith defense. Like, we don't know who this woman is, but she's also breaking the law and tricking us into employing her.
Exactly. But the commission doesn't operate on wild accusations in an email. They require evidence.
Right.
Panda Mart never provided any evidence to back up these claims, and they completely failed to attend any of the scheduled Fair Work Commission conciliation conferences or hearings.
Oh, they just didn't show up. So the tribunal just moves forward without them.
Yes.
And Ms. Yang attends with a Mandarin interpreter, and she brings an absolute mountain of receipts.
She was prepared.
She was so prepared. She produces her rosters, photographs of her working in the uniform, internal staff communications on messaging apps, and references to her visa status. She objectively proved she was an employee.
And the commission's ruling was swift and severe.
As it should be.
They found the termination to be harsh, unjust, and unreasonable. There was a total absence of a valid reason for dismissal, 0 procedural fairness, and 0 opportunity for the employee to respond to any allegations about her performance before the decision was made.
The referee stepped in because every single rule was broken.
Literally every rule.
So what was the penalty?
The FWC ordered Panda Mart to pay Ms. Yang over $14,000 in compensation.
Wow.
Yeah, which represented the 6 months she likely would have remained employed there had she not been illegally terminated, plus her unpaid superannuation.
Amazing.
But crucially, because the Fair Work Commission is an employment tribunal and does not have the jurisdiction to send police to retrieve a stolen passport, they formally and urgently referred the entire company to the Fair Work Ombudsman.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, that triggers a much broader federal investigation into their systemic exploitation practices.
It is a textbook example of a company flagrantly ignoring the statutory framework and actually suffering the consequences.
It really is.
But as satisfying as it is to see a bad actor held accountable, these clear-cut villain scenarios are not the norm, right? Like, Most disputes that land on a workplace relations specialist's desk are not mustache-twirling employers confiscating passports.
No, not at all. They are much, much messier.
Yeah,
The vast majority of workplace conflicts exist in a gray area of human friction, where the employer believes they are simply managing their business, and the employee truly believes they're being targeted and forced out.
which brings us to the ATAV tailoring case.
Right.
The mechanics of this case are fascinating because it's entirely about the gap between how an employee feels and what the law actually says.
A very common gap.
So we have an employee named Elmira Ilanova. She is Russian-born, and she works at a tailoring and alterations business in Melbourne called ATIV, run by Oksana Pashulia. The incident takes place on Thursday, March 26, 2026.
And the environmental context is crucial here. The staff are working in the tailoring shop, and a radio is playing a news report covering the ongoing war in Ukraine.
And just to pause and be completely clear, here we are neutrally reporting the facts of the FWC ruling regarding this workplace dispute. We're not taking any political sides regarding the geopolitical conflict itself.
Exactly. The tribunal's only focus, and our only focus, is how this external geopolitical argument broke down the internal workplace dynamic.
Right. That's the exact lens. So the radio is playing the news. Mrs. Pashulia, the business owner, overhears Mrs. Ilanova make a comment suggesting that Ukraine had started the war and needed to concede.
Right.
This immediately prompts a response from another coworker in the room who is also Russian, asserting that Russia started the war.
And the disagreement instantly goes from 0 to 100.
Oh, it erupts into a massive shouting match. It escalates to the point where a retail customer who is sitting in the reception area waiting for alterations gets up and physically leaves the store because of the yelling.
Yikes.
Yeah. So Ms. Pashulia has to intervene. She tells Ms. Ilanova that a customer just fled because of her volume and explicitly states that she needs a nice, quiet shop.
No. Objectively, requiring staff to not scream at each other in front of paying customers is a fundamental, lawful, and reasonable direction from a business owner.
Absolutely reasonable.
But Mrs. Ilanova's subjective experience of that moment was entirely different. Her version of events was that the coworker made derogatory remarks about Russian people generally and told her to go back to Russia.
So the tension is just through the roof. They all come into work the next day, Friday, and nobody says a word about it.
The silent treatment.
Yeah, it's that thick, toxic silence where everyone is just avoiding eye contact.
Yeah.
Then we get to the side out on Monday morning.
Right.
Mrs. Shulia approaches Mrs. Ilanova and plainly states she is still unhappy about the argument and the disruption from Thursday. In response, Mrs. Ilanova immediately starts packing up her personal belongings and says, "I need to have a job."
To which Miss Pashulia responds that she does have a job.
Yeah.
The owner tells her directly that she can either sit down at her sewing machine and do her work, or she can leave.
Mrs. Ilanova chooses to walk out. And almost as soon as she leaves the premises, she starts firing off text messages to her boss.
Right, creating that paper trail, but maybe not in the way she intended.
Exactly. She references her termination. She claims she was abused in the workplace. She alleges a hostile anti-Russian environment, and she states she was forced to leave. She then files an unfair dismissal claim.
Okay,
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to argue this from the employee's perspective for a moment.
go for it.
If an employee is standing in a room, feels completely isolated, gets into a heated argument, and subjectively feels so uncomfortable that they send texts in the heat of the moment saying, "I am being forced out," doesn't the law view that as constructive dismissal? Like, if I feel like my only option is to quit, isn't that the legal equivalent of being fired?
What's fascinating here is how strictly the Fair Work Commission polices the boundary of constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal is a real legal concept. It happens when an employer's conduct makes it virtually impossible for the employee to remain in their job, forcing a resignation.
Right, forced out.
But the legal threshold, the reasonable person test, is exceptionally high.
So it's not enough to just feel uncomfortable.
Not at all. The FWC has to look at whether the employer acted with the intent to force a resignation, or if they breached the employment contract so fundamentally that resignation was the only logical, objective option left to a reasonable person.
Wow, intent is key.
Yeah. In this case, the commission had to separate Mrs. Ilanova's subjective distress from Mrs. Pashulia's objective intent.
So how do they weigh the evidence?
Yeah.
Because it's basically a he said, she said about the tone of the Monday morning conversation.
Well, they look at the surrounding behavioral evidence. The FWC found the employer, Mrs. Pashulia, to be clear, credible and convincing.
Really?
Yeah, they accepted her evidence entirely. The defining factor was that Mrs. Pachulia had physically prepared tailoring work for Mrs. Ilanova to complete that very Monday morning. Furthermore, she had sent a completely normal, friendly text message to Mrs. Ilanova before the shift even started.
Right. You don't lay out fabric and send a friendly good morning text to an employee you are planning to psychologically torture into resigning.
Exactly. The objective evidence pointed to an employer expecting a normal workday.
Yeah.
So the commission ruled that the Monday conversation was not a termination, nor was it a coercive tactic. It was simply a manager enforcing a basic workplace behavioral standard.
Because asking your staff to keep their voices down is just management.
Yes. The tribunal made a very sharp distinction here. Being managed for inappropriate workplace behavior is not the same thing as being bullied.
That's such a good point.
It is definitely not the same thing as being unfairly dismissed. An employer is allowed to tell you they are unhappy with your conduct.
Right. And what about the allegations of an anti-Russian hostile environment? That seems like a serious discrimination claim to throw into a text message.
Yeah, well, the FWC noted a critical flaw in that argument. The coworker who allegedly made the anti-Russian comments was herself Russian.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, that objective fact severely undermined the credibility of the claim that the shop was a hostile, xenophobic environment targeting Ms. Ilanova's nationality.
Yeah, that really pokes a hole in it.
The final ruling was definitive. Ms. Ilanova was not fired on the employer's initiative, and her employer's conduct did not force her to resign. She walked out of her own accord, which means her unfair dismissal claim was dismissed.
It is a phenomenal reality check.
It really is.
Like, you can be 100% convinced that you are the victim in your own professional story. You can have texts documenting your distress. But when the referee reviews the tape, if the employer didn't actually hit below the belt, the law sides with the business just trying to keep the peace.
Which highlights the immense value of engaging workplace relations specialists early in a dispute. We all suffer from a massive bias toward our own feelings when we feel threatened. A specialist from AWDR can look at your text messages, look at the timeline of events, strip away the emotion, and say, I know you feel like you were forced out, but looking at the statutes, your boss just gave you a lawful and reasonable direction to quiet down.
Right, giving you that objective lens.
Exactly. It saves the worker the financial and emotional cost of fighting a losing battle in a federal tribunal.
So what does this all mean for you listening? We've dissected two wildly different realities today.
We have.
In the Panda Mart case, we saw calculated, systemic exploitation. The employer bypassed every procedural rule, weaponized a worker's passport, and fired her in a car park.
Disgusting behavior.
Yeah. Because the employer breached the actual statutory framework, the Fair Work Commission dropped the hammer, awarding compensation and triggering a federal investigation.
Conversely, in the ADIV tailoring case, you had an employee who felt deeply aggrieved and felt the environment was hostile. But because the employer's actions managing employee behavior and setting professional boundaries adhered to the rules of procedural fairness, the legal system protected the business.
Knowing the mechanics of the law is your absolute best protection. You have to understand the difference between having a terrible, stressful day at work, receiving a legitimate reprimand, and experiencing a truly illegal breach of your employment rights.
Couldn't agree more.
Fairness, in the eyes of the law, is a verb. It is a process. It is not an emotion. And seeking out independent specialists helps you figure out if your boss is actually breaking the law or if you just, don't like their management style.
This raises an important question, though. It's a scenario that wasn't covered in our case files today, but it is rapidly approaching on the horizon for every single person currently in the workforce.
Oh, I am intrigued. Where are we heading?
Well, we've spent this entire deep dive analyzing disputes driven by messy, erratic human behavior.
Right, like fraudulent HR managers, business owners who panic and confiscate documents.
Explosive arguments over radio broadcasts, and the subtle friction of tone and miscommunication.
Yeah, very human stuff.
The Fair Work Commission currently adjudicates these disputes by examining human intent and human reasonableness. But what happens in the very near future when artificial intelligence takes over HR monitoring and the dismissal process entirely?
Oh, that is a chilling thought.
If human managers currently blur the lines of unfair dismissal through emotional reactions and sloppy paperwork, how are we going to defend our workplace rights against a purely algorithmic firing?
Wow.
When a piece of software decides your keystroke productivity dipped below an acceptable threshold, or an AI flags your internal chat messages as a breach of company culture and auto-terminates your access, who do you cross-examine in a tribunal?
Right. How do you prove a machine lacked procedural fairness? It fundamentally breaks the boxing referee analogy. Like, it's one thing to prove your human boss had a vendetta or failed to give you a written warning. It is an entirely different nightmare to try and subpoena a server rack that locked you out of your email at 2 in the morning because an algorithm optimized the payroll.
The procedural rules we rely on today were built for human conflicts. When the machines start firing us, the entire legal framework will have to be rewritten.
Well, on that wonderfully dystopian note, the next time your heart starts pounding because of a tense conversation with your manager, take a deep breath. Strip away the emotion, look at the procedure, and figure out if they are actually breaking the law. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.